talk tonight about ticks, right? So ticks are the big thing that really impact our health, right? So you have mosquitoes, mosquito-borne diseases, and you have tick-borne diseases, but ticks by far are the most common vector-borne diseases. So we have this thing going on now, right? This thing called fake news, right? That's big in the media right now. And so what is it exactly? This is probably one of my favorite things about this job is that I get to look at news and see whether or not it's fake. The CDC came out with this report last year in 2018, and they said disease cases from mosquitoes, ticks, and flea bites tripled in the US from 2004 to 2016. And then the media kind of jumped on this, like pretty much everyone, from CNN to Fox News to NPR, they all said the same exact thing. They all kind of had this like, oh, geez, like things are getting really bad, diseases are really increasing, watch out. And at the bottom they said, cover up, and that was pretty much it, cover up and use DEET. And so people are like, what the heck, like is this really all I can do? But I looked at this report because I really wanted to, that's part of my job, is to dig down and see if this is actually true. And what I found is that mosquito-borne diseases aren't actually tripling. You got this massive spike here in 2016 where Zika was reported. That was the first year we started reporting Zika. And they included data from territories, from US territories. And what we found is that out of the 41,000 and some odd cases of Zika, 37,000 occurred in US territories, places like Puerto Rico. And when you remove that from the data set, the Zika, right over here in 2016, what you see is that mosquito-borne diseases are not actually tripling or increasing. They stay pretty steady until about 2016 where you get a big spike. And that tends to be what mosquito-borne diseases do. When you get a mutation in one of the viruses, you tend to get a spike of cases, and then that tends to dip down over time. And we do see that again in 2017 and 2018 where that does dip down. So in my opinion, this data set was a little bit cherry-picked. If they had ended the data in 2015 or 2017, you would not have seen that tripling at all. But what they fail to recognize is that tick-borne diseases, year to year, make up the bulk of all vector-borne diseases. And even in 2016, it was 51% was Zika, but if you pulled out Zika, again, 81%. So ticks are really one of those things that they may not hit you as hard as, say, Triple E or West Nile, but they are much, much more common. And we see that the incidence rates for these tick-borne diseases are on the rise. Maybe not the tripling from the 2004 to 2016, but since they started being reported back in 1990, they have gone in this upward trajectory, upward slope. And these two down here are two other diseases that we've been reporting. They're going up on a similar trend. They're going up. So what about cases per year? So the CDC reports about 30,000 cases of Lyme per year. Now we have 325 million people in the US. And so when you really do the math, you think, right, that's only 0.009% of the population. So is that right? I mean, everywhere I go, I ask people, I say, how many people know someone who's had Lyme disease? And all the hands fly up. It's almost everyone. Almost every single person knows someone or has had Lyme disease themselves. They've had it, their kid, their dog. Something isn't right with these numbers and the way it's being reported. So the CDC actually looked into this. And they admitted that the new estimate might actually be as high as 300,000 cases per year. But if you ask doctors and you ask researchers who have really been studying this for a long time, they'll tell you that this number is still just a guess. It might be higher, it might be lower, it might be much, much higher. It might be 1 million cases. We don't actually know. But wait, there's even more. So all of those cases, depending on whether or not you look at them as 30,000 or 300,000 or 1 million, are all concentrated in two areas, the upper Midwest and the Northeast. And this is data from 2001. And you see over the course of 14 years, it does fan out, and you do end up seeing it in other states outside these areas. But I mean, if you look at Massachusetts, that looks like someone just took a crayon and colored it in. They're not individual dots representing cases. It's virtually everywhere in Massachusetts. But this is a really interesting thing. So overall, the US incidence rate in 2015 was only 8.9. And that's significant because the CDC defines high incidence as 10. And so this is still not really setting off that smoke detector, even though here in Massachusetts, the fire is full blown. So we know a lot about Lyme disease. We know that it's not a government conspiracy. They've traced the DNA of this bacterial spirochete back at least 20,000 years ago, back to the last glacial maximum. And we know it's caused by a spirochete bacteria, and we know that it's dependent on on ticks to spread, on the black-legged tick in this particular area that undergoes a 2-year life cycle. And that 2-year life cycle is very important for the transmission of this disease. But there's still a lot of unanswered questions that we're investigating now. For instance, is it completely curable? How many strains are there? So Lyme disease, even though it's one disease, is not caused by one species of bacteria. It's caused by a number of species of bacteria. Even here in Massachusetts, there are several species that cause Lyme disease. Borrelia burgdorferi is the main one, but we also have Borrelia mayoni that can cause Lyme disease. In Europe, they have Borrelia asvelli and Borrelia greenii. And so even though they're calling it Lyme disease, no matter what species you have, it's different bacteria species. Does it cause permanent damage? That's another question. We don't actually know. So you get these people coming forward that might say they have post-treatment Lyme or long-term Lyme. Is it permanent damage or just persistent infection? We still don't actually know the answer to that. And it's not just Lyme. There's more diseases. There's about 9 other diseases and counting. So there's a number of different diseases that you could potentially be exposed to in addition to Lyme disease. They're less common, but they do exist. And I want to talk a little bit about one of them that's a little bit scary. So this one, alpha-gal allergy, this is transmitted by Lone Star tick. It's really interesting. So Lone Star tick is not really found in Plymouth County with the exception of this area. Like the area right around Wampatuck, we have had hits of Lone Star tick. And I don't know if it's there. I don't know if people are just traveling to the Cape where it is prevalent and bringing it back and finding it here attached to them. But it's something that at least Hingham residents should be cautious of, is Lone Star tick in this area. What is alpha-gal allergy? So this is not a feminist superhero, despite being called alpha-gal. It's actually the allergy to red meat. So this is the allergy to some of our favorite foods, right? So steak tips, burgers, all that nice good stuff. But also, it impacts things that are not just red meat, but mammalian products. So it's going to impact things like dairy, so ice cream, if people like ice cream. It's going to impact your ability to eat ice cream potentially. Or things like gummy bears, so that's my favorite food. So gummy bears contain gelatin, so you could potentially become allergic to gummy bears. And that would be awful to become allergic to steak tips, ice cream, gummy bears, cheese, bacon. That's like pretty much my staple diet, is that. Then we have this thing called the Longhorned Tick. I don't know if you guys have heard about this in the paper, but I just want to go over it very briefly. So Longhorned Tick, discovered in 2017, but we think it's been here since 2010. We think it's just kind of flown under the radar, been misidentified as another tick species. This can reproduce asexually, so they don't need no man, but each generation takes about 1 year. So when you hear this being reported in the newspapers as rapidly spreading, really hugely invasive, you really want to consider that it's going to take a while for it to actually spread. Even if one tick ended up in your yard, it's still going to take a full year for that generation to reproduce. But then it's really a matter of when it's going to make it here, not a matter of if. So they did some modeling for this tick, and they found that it's a very cold tolerant. They actually projected it all the way up into Nova Scotia. So it's not really a question of, and if you look again at Massachusetts around here, the darker color represents where it can spread. And Massachusetts is pretty dark, especially in this area. So it's really not a matter of when, if it's going to be here. It's a matter of when. So what's causing this? So now you've got, when I was a child, we only had to worry about, back in the old days, we only had to worry about dog ticks, right? And now there's deer ticks, there's this Lone Star tick I'm telling you about, there's the Longhorned tick I'm telling you. What's causing all of this? Why are there more diseases? So in terms of the diseases, for instance, what we think it has to do with is maybe one piece of the puzzle is just that it's being recognized more readily, being diagnosed more often. We think that might be contributing to some of this incidence rate. So when you saw that graph of Lyme disease kind of going on this upward trajectory, maybe some of that is it being recognized more. Maybe some cases used to be diagnosed as it's in your head or rheumatoid arthritis, but maybe now it's being recognized. We don't know. But we also think that the risk of disease is indeed higher. First off, we think there are more ticks, especially deer ticks. And we think that these ticks are carrying infection more often. So we do think that this is, so why is that happening? So I'll get into that a little bit more, but it's very complicated. We don't know. We have a bunch of guesses as to why that might be happening, but we don't know for sure. So what about the deer? So this is what everyone guesses is the reason why. We didn't have deer back in like the 80s and 90s. We didn't have deer tick back in the 80s and 90s. And people think deer tick, and they do like the science in their head, and they think, oh my gosh, I know exactly why this is happening. But what we found is a number of things when we've studied the interaction of deer and ticks. First off, what we know is that deer are indeed a very important reproductive host for ticks. The deer ticks really, really like the taste of deer blood. They just really enjoy it, kind of like my niece really likes mac and cheese. But in terms of reducing deer, what we found is that deer culling hasn't been all too successful. It's worked very well on islands and peninsula, but it's never once worked on mainland areas, like an area like Hingham, for instance. You might be able to do it in Hull, but maybe not so much Hingham. Maybe a place like World's End, it would work really well. What we found with these deer culling programs is that there might be this notion of maybe a minimum threshold. For instance, on one of these islands, they reduced every single deer on that island with the exception of 2, and there was no impact in the tick population whatsoever. What they found is that there were more ticks on those 2 deer rather than there being fewer ticks on the island. And when they got rid of those 2 ticks, then they saw the populations go down significantly, but the deer ticks still stuck around, even though there were no deer to feed on. And then you might need to even prevent the immigration of new deer into that area. So to do something like that in a mainland area, which they have tried in New Jersey, it's a very, very big undertaking. So overall, targeting deer, maybe not too effective, maybe not great bang for your buck. But so the deer tick, like my niece, doesn't just eat mac and cheese. If I were to take away that mac and cheese, she'd then eat her steak, her broccoli, her chicken nuggets, her French fries. And what we find is the deer tick is very similar. It feeds on about 125 different species of animal, not just deer. And so what we know is that mice are an important host for them, especially during their larval and nymphal stages. But also chipmunks, shrews, voles, and robins are also what we call rescue hosts. So they're going to rescue these diseases back from the brink of extinction. If you were to eradicate both mice and deer, just the presence of these animals alone would maintain that cycle of tick-borne disease. So, I mean, if you're thinking about animal eradication or animal culling programs, I mean, you're looking at a number of animals you would have to reduce to have a noticeable impact on the tick population. So what's interesting about this, about why tick-borne diseases are increasing, is that we notice that the risk, that incidence rates tend to be higher in these suburban habitats, in areas that we love, like our backyards, right? So in fragmented habitats. So this is a picture of Mattapoisett. And again, you can, just to give you an idea of like habitat fragmentation, as you kind of take this forest here and chop it up and build these houses, that's where we find that the risk tends to go up. And what this guy, Rick Ostfeld, believes it has to do with, and this is just one idea, maybe not, it's not thoroughly proven just yet, but this is what he believes is it might have to do with that you have the presence of things like deer, mice, chipmunks, shrews, voles, robins, all those tasty animals, they tend to go up, and the predators of those particular animals tend to decrease. So for instance, bobcats. Like I've lived in Massachusetts for about 34 years. I've never once seen a bobcat here. But if we did have bobcats, apparently these are really good at hunting things like those chipmunks, shrews, voles, mice, all those things. They really kind of knock down those populations. And when you get rid of them, you know, obviously you get tick buffet. And so that's the current thinking behind why ticks are getting worse and why infection rates are getting worse, is it has to do with developing suburban land. And what's really frustrating is that we can't really do too much about that. It's just going to keep happening. So another reason that tick-borne diseases are rising is that we've changed what's going on. Like I said, we've developed this land, but we're not adapting to that situation. That the parameters have changed, and now what are we doing to protect ourselves? Often the number one question I get is, what are they doing about it? And we think about that, you know, what is them? What are they? Sometimes it's the government, sometimes it's the CDC, sometimes it's scientists, sometimes it's the doctors. What is it that they are doing? And everyone wants to kind of think about this problem as not my problem. I want someone else to fix it for me. But if we try to break away from that line of thinking and think about, okay, these diseases already exist. The ticks are getting worse. Now, what am I going to do to fix that? I used to live in an apartment. And I wouldn't even wait for my landlord to come fix things. I would go out and fix it myself because I didn't want to live in that condition. And we want to think about that same mindset with our yards and where we live. We don't want to live in this condition of high risk. We can change that by implementing practices that are scientifically proven to keep ourselves safe. So this is me. I'm out fishing. I like to do a lot of fishing. I like to do a lot of camping. And I came back from this trip without a single tick on my body. And I can safely say that every single camping trip I've ever been on, I've came back without a single tick on my body. Because we have tools that already exist that we can rely on. So we'll start a little bit, but how do ticks actually make us sick, right? So it's all about preventing the bite. If you prevent the bite, you prevent disease. So ticks don't feed necessarily like someone drawing blood from you with a needle. They're actually looking to do what we create what we call a feeding lesion. So this is going to be almost like a wound underneath your skin. So when the tick inserts its hypostome in its mouth parts right here, it's going to spit into your body. And I know you just ate, so I know how disgusting that must sound. But it'll actually spit into your body, and it's going to spit things. They're going to create this lesion. It's going to secrete vasodilators to promote blood flow to that site, anticoagulants, prevent that site from clotting, and then immunosuppressive agents and pain reducers, all this good stuff that's going to prevent our bodies from even detecting and even knowing it's there. Because this tick wants to feed for about 4 to 7 days. And it doesn't just spit once. It doesn't just spit once and have that lesion be created. It actually has to maintain that lesion by spitting again. So it's going to drink and then spit, and drink and spit, and drink and spit over the course of this time. And if you don't like when someone does that to your drink, right, you really don't want a tick doing this to your body. So this is actually how ticks transmit these germs and make us sick, is through this spitting action. So a lot of the germs reside either in the salivary glands of the tick or in the midgut of the tick. And so it has to do, and that's why you get this idea of it's got to be an X amount of time before the tick can transmit disease, because it's this whole process of spitting, creating that lesion, drinking, having these germs kind of wake up and know that the tick is feeding, and then migrate to the salivary glands and then be spat back into your body. So one of the things you can do is just simply keep ticks off your lawn. So the well-manicured American lawn right here is a desert for a lot of life. A lot of times there's this trend now of bringing back bees and pollinators, letting your lawn grow in. And it's true. Looking at this, I would bet you money that I would never be able to find a tick on this property. You're not going to find it. There's not a lot of dense shrubs. The lawn is really clean cut. You can take like soccer nets and things like that and pull them away and put them in areas like this where you know that the ticks aren't going to be. And this is because ticks dry out really, really fast. So our friend the deer tick, it needs about 82% humidity or higher. It actually tends to prefer about 90% humidity and above. So it needs really, really damp, really humid conditions. Even when you think in the fall, right, it starts to get really dry. Maybe the ambient humidity in a room like this might be as low as like 20% humidity. That deer tick it's going to find locations that harbor humidity. And so you think about things like dense brush or leaf piles, wood piles, maybe the edge of your property. What they find is that about 88% of ticks are about 10 feet from the forest edge. So, or unless, of course, you let your lawn grow in massively. And I want to talk a little bit about that too, is that the recommendation for pollinators was to let your lawn grow in for about 3 weeks. And that's not going to the ticks aren't going to capitalize on that property instantly. They actually ran a study this year that was published where people let their lawns grow in, and then they swept those lawns for ticks, and they didn't find a single tick on any of those properties. So it's not rapid. But if you leave it there for months and months at a time, well, then you might have ticks kind of get dropped off in that area, and then they're going to survive in those particular areas. You can do this thing called a perimeter yard spray. So this is something that I know is a little bit contentious. Not everyone wants to treat their yard with chemicals. But if you're someone who wants to take every measure that you can possibly take to prevent ticks from being in your yard, this is a very, very effective solution. And there's a lot of robust data to support that. So what I would recommend is that you use a synthetic spray, not really use those natural products. Bifenthrin or Talstar work really well. What you want is a pyrethroid. So permethrin can work, deltamethrin can work, cypermethrin can work, but bifenthrin has been the most heavily studied. You want to spray twice. You don't need to spray all summer long. You just need 2 sprays timed at the very right time. So one in early May, and this is to target the nymphal stage of ticks. So those are going to start coming out very soon. They'll actually start coming out at the end of this month. But you want to spray in early May when you know that ticks are definitely going to be out. There's going to be a lot more prevalent, because if you spray before they come out, then you might not be hitting them. You want to spray a second time in June, and that's to target the next generation of ticks, the larvae. So you get about 8 weeks of protection. So the product like this is going to last about 4 weeks. So then you can think about 8 weeks of protection where any ticks that are coming into that area are going to get killed. And you've got this optional spray in late September, maybe to target the emergence of adult ticks that might be coming out around that time. It's optional because if you do these 2 sprays, you should get very, very high control over these. And the adult ticks are a little bit higher off of the ground. They might not actually get exposed to that product, so that it's not as effective to do this late September spray. I want to talk a little bit about the all-natural products. So these have been very, very trendy. So these all-natural products are what we call 25B exempt products. So they're actually exempt. EPA exempts them from testing for both safety and efficacy. And that's really important, that it's both parts, that they just conclude they're all natural, go ahead and use it. But we don't really know a heck of a lot about these. We don't know if they work, we don't know if they're safe. And the data on them are very, very sparse. Because EPA doesn't require testing, we don't have any data on that end. And then in academia, we also don't have a heck of a lot of data. There's one particular study that was put out in 2016 by this woman, Megan Dyer, from URI. And these are a number of these 25B exempt products. And what you see here is bifenthrin, the lower the bars, the fewer ticks they found. So the high bars are a bad thing. So this is water. The bars are very high. And then you got the MET52, a Century IC3. There was no significant difference between these products in water. And then you have bifenthrin down here where they didn't find any ticks. Again, they ran the test again in another year. You found these products maybe a little bit more effective here, but still, the residual for these products was not any different from water. And bifenthrin, again, 0 ticks. Over here, again, these products not nearly as effective as water. You got some knockdown for a Century IC3, but the residual not as effective as water. But bifenthrin knocked them down once again. So if you're really going to want to do something and you want to spend money on this product to really protect your family, I say you don't mess around. You either do the bifenthrin or you don't do any spray at all. I wouldn't even bother spending the money. The different bars, just to get in a little bit, knockdown and residual. Knockdown is spraying the ticks directly. So if you do one of these sprays, yeah, sure, you might get an effect with the Century IC3 if you sprayed that tick directly on the tick. But what's going to happen 2 weeks from that point? It's going to look a little bit more like this residual, not any more effective than water. So we've got these tick tubes. So these tick tubes, again, are an option that I thought were a really elegant solution to this problem. And in their first study put out by Dr. Mather down in URI, he found that they worked. But then they tried to replicate this study. And what we know about science is reproduction is really, really important, being able to reproduce those same results. And you had Kirby Stafford and Tom Daniels. These are 2 other researchers. They tried to reproduce the study in not just one location, but multiple states. And in those states, multiple locations throughout 3 years. And they found that they didn't work at all. So for these 2 researchers who had done more robust studies, these tubes didn't do a darn thing. But for Tom Mather, for URI, they actually worked. So it's kind of like, why did they work for him and why didn't they work for these guys? We don't know. What I can tell you is that you can't really rely on them. So if they're working for you, maybe keep spending the money. But if you're someone who doesn't want to take chances again, if you just do the yard spray, that's all you have to do. You don't even have to buy these. But if you wanted to use these, then I guess take your chances. What we find is that white-footed mice, again, are not the only animal that we're looking at. So we're looking at chipmunks, robins, shrews, voles. They're not going to take advantage of these tubes. And then not all mice behave this way. So some mice may hoard these cotton balls, some mice may not. Some mice may take all the cotton balls in your yard and then leave none for the others. And so we see that could be the case with these tick tubes. So what about outside your yard? So those are your options for tick protection within your yard. What if you're someone like me who spends more time outside his yard than in his yard? So step 1, again, is cover up. This is the thing you hear all the time. Just wear protective clothing. Sometimes they get into excruciating detail. Wear light-colored clothing. Wear this, do that. I'm not going to talk to you about that. I think you know how to protect yourself from ticks. But I will tell you is that season matters. So what type of clothing you wear at the different types of the year can matter. And you can wear shorts in the summer, for instance. So in April through September, what we have is the nymph stage tick. And these particular ticks are going to be found really close to the ground. So about 1.2 inches, you want to think 1 to 2 inches off the ground, ankle height for the nymph stage ticks. So in the summer months, you want to think just really what is touching that ground. That's where you need to be cautious about these nymphal ticks. When they can be found higher up off the ground is when you're moving things like logs and log piles. They can be found in those log piles or in rock walls. But if you're just going out for a walk, they're not going to be found in these tall grass or in really in these dense brush. They're going to be found really, really close to the ground. When we get into September, and even now into May, so you get a little bit of overlap, you get the adults. And these are the ticks that you can find very high up off the ground. So these can be found up to 2.5 feet off the ground. And this is where you want to think about worrying about like tall grass and brush that's tickling your waist and things like that. So you think this might be waist height, or if you've got like my niece who's 3, that's her whole body, 2.5 feet off the ground. So that's these adults that you're worrying about. But in the summer, yeah, you can wear shorts because the nymphs are going to be really, really close to the ground. So ticks are active even in the winter, and that's the other point I like to bring up, is that the adult stage tick is active from the fall until the next spring, and it's that whole time period. Ticks have about a 2-year life cycle. They synthesize glycerol, and even in the really frigid, cold temperatures, they'll burrow underneath leaves and snow and get really nice and cozy under that, and that will protect them against these really frigid below 0 temperatures. The dog ticks that we used to worry about, those ticks go into almost like a torpor. They go into almost like a hibernation stage, and those ticks tend to go away in the wintertime. And that's where I think you kind of get this idea of a tick season, is that when we only had to worry about dog ticks, those ticks we did have a tick season for those, but with deer tick, we don't have a tick season. It's year-round. You can do this thing, tucking your pants into your socks. So this is really nerdy, although apparently in elementary schools and high schools, it's catching on as a trend. I think they think it's really cool, probably because I think it's nerdy. They think it's cool. But the reason I do this, and I do this when I'm out camping. I don't do it all the time. I don't do it when I'm hiking on just a day trip, but I will do it if I know I'm going to be camping for a long time where I may not have access to a shower. And that's because ticks can find this gap between your ankle and your pants. And sometimes they bite the first place they see, but other times they keep crawling. And they'll crawl up and up and up all the way to places that only your doctor should have access to. And the last thing I want to do when I'm out camping for days at a time is realize I have a tick in one of those hard to reach spots and need my buddy to pull it off for me, because that ain't going to happen. So I'll definitely do this. And I also do this when I'm going out collecting ticks, when I do surveillance for ticks, because I look specifically for areas where I know they're going to be ticks, and I walk right through it. And I don't want to I know I'm going into these high-risk areas. I just tuck my pants into my socks. It prevents the ticks from crawling up underneath those pant cuffs. But covering up, like I said, that's the last thing people want to hear, because it only gets you so far. People don't want to walk through on a hike and end up like this, end up with ticks covering their entire pant leg, right? What if there was something you could do? What if there was something you could do to repel ticks and also kill any ticks that touched your legs, touched your pants? And there's this stuff called permethrin. You don't have to buy this particular product, but I like to bring up this product because they make a water-based pump spray, and the general consensus is this water-based spray is better than the aerosol can because you've got a better spray pattern. So if you wanted to use this product, you can. But this repels ticks, and it also kills ticks. So you can actually treat your clothing with this product. And if, like in the previous example where I tucked my pants into my socks, if you think there's no ticks that would have access to my skin, and any ticks that touched my pants or my socks or my shoes would die. And that's a really nice feeling, knowing that I can walk through anywhere and be fully protected from ticks. So how do you use this stuff, right? It's different from bug spray. You apply it to clothing and shoes only, so fabrics. I do a lot of hiking, so I actually apply it to my backpack as well, because when I'm done hiking, right, I set my backpack on the ground, get a drink of water out of my thing, and setting that backpack on the ground, I know that it could pick up ticks. It smells like sweat, it smells like me. Ticks may be attracted to it, and then if I put it on my back, now even if I treated my pants and shoes, those ticks have now taken an elevator right up to the back of my neck over all that tick protection. So treating anything that may touch the ground is also really important. If you do a lot of gardening, gloves may be important as well. But after applying it, you wait for it to dry. On a day like this, I mean, it may take longer than 4 hours. The point is that it's going to take a really long time depending on the humidity in the air. In the fall, you might get away with like half an hour. But what I do is if I know I'm going out on a weekend, I treat my clothes during the week, I set them out to dry overnight, and then I just take them in. Because this stuff is good for a really long time. It's good through 6 washings or 1 month. So you know that even if you were to treat it beforehand, like let's say Friday, if you're going out to hike on Saturday, it's not going to make an impact in how effective it is because it's good for this long. So is it safe? So yeah, it kills ticks. What's it do to me, right? It's safe for infants, toddlers, and children, safe for pregnant and nursing mothers. So this stuff is really flippin' safe. It's the same active chemical that they use in lice and scabies shampoo, except this stuff you put on your clothes is at 0.5%, lice shampoo is at 3%. So lice shampoo that you put on this directly on the kid's skin is 6 times more potent than you would apply to the outside of your clothing. That's because ticks are really, really small. They're very, very sensitive to this product. The only thing I would like to caution you against is cats, if anyone here has cats. Keep it away from cats until it's dry, but it's safe for cats after that point. So this is my cat. I love my cat. I'm a cat person. I love my cat even more than my fiance. But I let my cat crawl in my pants that it is sprayed with this compound, and she licks her fur when she's on this. She rolls around, and she is A-okay. But I wait for it to dry. So what about wearing shorts? What if you're not someone who wears pants all summer long? What if you like to wear shorts? What if you like to wear sandals? There are ways that you can protect your skin from ticks, and they don't work as well. They act as more of a repellent rather than something that would kill ticks. But if you want to, if comfort in wearing shorts or wearing sandals is really important to you, you can use something else. The way repellents work is they take advantage of these things called Haller's organs. These are basically the tick nose. This is what the tick uses to sense us. And they block them up. And so you want to use EPA-registered repellents. Again, because the 25B exempt, the all-natural repellents, I can't tell you that they don't work, but I also can't tell you that they do work because we really just don't have data on these repellents to prove any of that. But if you use an EPA-registered product, you can have security knowing that this is going to provide adequate protection for you. You can look for this EPA registered number. That's how you know it's EPA registered. But just as a general rule of thumb, you got 4 products here. You got DEET, which everyone knows about. That's off. But you also have picaridin, oil of lemon eucalyptus, and 3N-butyl-N-acetyl aminopropionic acid ethyl ester. Or you can call this IR3535, or you can call this Avon Skin So Soft with Bug Guard. So all 4 of these products work really, really well at protecting you against tick bites. But you don't need to use 100% of this stuff. So for DEET, picaridin, and IR3535, 20% will do the trick. You don't need to go 100%. Any instances where people have gotten sick from DEET is due to overexposure of DEET. So a lot of times you hear that maybe like this buzz line of a child dies from DEET. It's generally 100% DEET where the child has gotten their hands on a bottle of it and drank it. And so if you want to avoid overexposure, maybe just stick with 20% or more. I use off deep woods, that's 25%. Or I'll use picaridin because picaridin makes a cream, and I kind of like that cream when I'm going hiking. It lasts longer, and you can apply it to things like your face where it might prevent mosquitoes from biting your face. That would be more for a mosquito thing rather than a tick thing. But you can use it, take your pick, really. Any of these work. Oil of lemon eucalyptus, you do need a higher concentration of that to be as effective as DEET, picaridin, and IR3535. What about your pets, right? Because how many people here have pets? Dogs? So dogs like to do this, right? And what did I tell you? Ticks love being in leaf piles. They like these areas that harbor moisture. And then dogs like to do this, right? And so the ticks, they don't, like I said, they don't necessarily bite right away. What one study found is that it usually takes about half an hour to 2 hours for the tick to actually bite. And so if the dog comes and immediately lays on your bed, that tick may actually get groomed off, scratched off, or it may actually climb off your dog onto this bed, or a couch or a chair that you like to sit in. And what we know is that that tick, while it might not live long in your house, it may live long enough to bite you, and once it's biting you, it gets all the water and all the nutrients it needs to survive for the course of its feeding. In addition to that, pets are also part of our family that we want to keep them safe from tick-borne disease as well. So I would recommend that you speak with your veterinarian about this. I can't give you this blanket approach that's going to keep ticks off your pet. There's a bunch of different, even dogs come in all different sizes. Veterinarians recommend all different practices. But you can vaccinate your dog against Lyme. I do caution that if your veterinarian says to use a product for dogs, that you can't necessarily cheap out and use it on your cat. So this particular product, Canine Advantix 2, even though this box and this packaging look the same, and even this kind of looks like a cat, you cannot use this on a cat. You can actually make your cat sick, potentially even kill your cat. So just follow the label, follow instructions. It's there for a reason when applying these products. So no protection is 100%. Even in studies, even certain studies have shown 100% reduction in ticks. Like I showed you that study where bifenthrin reduced 100% of the ticks. I still can't give you that guarantee that it's going to work that way all the time, every single time. I can't have people saying, well, Blake, you told me that it would reduce 99% of the ticks or 100% of the ticks, and I got Lyme disease, now I'm suing Plymouth County. I can't do that. So tick checks are still really important, but these methods, those above methods, will very drastically reduce the number of ticks you encounter. Check yourself and your pets often. There was one particular study here that was done in 1995. They looked at 377 people, and what they found is that 10% of those people noticed ticks attached in less than 24 hours or less, or in 24 hours or less. So you can't really rely on yourself to feel this or just notice it. What they found is that it's not a very reliable method of finding out a tick is there. And even 5 days later, 60 hours, 5 days, not even 100% of the people noticed. 13% of the people still did not notice a tick feeding on their body. And these nymphs, right, they only feed for about 5 days. So when people come and tell me, they say, I had a tick, I got Lyme disease, I never even noticed a tick. Well, yeah, I mean, that happens frequently. People don't notice a tick on their body. So what about this 24-hour rule? This always comes up. I always get a question about this. Well, the only thing we know is that risk of transmission increases over time. That's the only thing we know. We don't know. It's not hard and fast. It's not like Cinderella, where like the stroke of midnight, all of a sudden now you have a disease. This kind of notion, this 24-hour rule, is based on not that much data and not very good data, in my opinion. It's not very strong data. In these particular studies, they've looked at mouse models because the ethics of taking someone, infecting someone with Lyme disease with a tick, they're just not really there. You can't really do that. So they purposely infect these mouse models, and what they tend to find is that mice contract the disease in about 24 hours as the earliest that they contract it. But they don't know if it's 23 hours, 22 hours, 21 hours, 20 hours, 18. They don't know. It could even be 12 hours and 30 minutes. They have no idea. So remove the tick as soon as possible. And then there's things like Rocky Mountain spotted fever that transmits 10 to 20 hours. Powassan virus is 15 minutes, and we don't know about certain other diseases. What do you look for? Nymphs are about the size of a sesame seed. Adults are about the size of nymphs are about the size of a poppy seed. Adults are about the size of a sesame seed. What do you do if you find a tick? So step one, you don't panic, right? I know that's the first thing everyone does when they see a tick. They panic. What you want to do is you want to remove it properly. A pair of handy tweezers will do the job. Firmly grasp it. You want to grasp this part of the tick right here. So this is called the scutum. It's a really hard part of the tick. If you try to grasp this back end, that gets really, really soft, and you might make a bloody mess. But if you grab the scutum, that doesn't change, and that's really hard. So you want to come at it, grab that part, and then pull straight up with steady force. Don't use matches, gasoline, nail polish remover, any of those things you might have seen on Facebook. What we know is that they may get off a tick. Like if you take a match, a burnt match, and you stick it up a tick's butt, it might actually back out. But we don't know if that reduces disease transmission. And what's the whole point of getting off a tick, right? To reduce disease transmission. So you might kind of be doing the wrong thing by doing one of those kind of do life hacks or do-it-yourself methods. What do you do after you remove the tick? So most people, they're going to flush the tick down the toilet. When I used to bring ticks to my dad as a kid, he'd crush them with a hammer. And I still think that's the most masculine way to kill a tick. But I'm going to tell you to save the tick. So bag it, date it. And by date, I mean write the date on that bag. And the reason behind this is because the evidence of that tick bite is really important. So this date you were bit can actually help tell doctors when you were bit and how long it's been since you were bit. If you're guessing at that date, well then that's not really reliable information to give your doctor. Why you want to save it is because species actually matters. So not all diseases can be transmitted by all ticks. We've got 3 human-biting ticks here. The deer tick is one of them. That can transmit 5 diseases. You've got the American dog tick. You have 2 diseases here. And then Lone Star tick can do 5 diseases itself. And the only place it overlaps really is here. So if you don't identify the tick, if you don't save the tick, well, now you're looking at maybe at all 10 diseases, versus if you were only bit by this dog tick, well, now maybe you're only looking at these 2 diseases right here. And also knowing that, hey, I was bit by a dog tick, well, now I'm not at risk at all for Lyme disease, for instance. Or if I was bit by this deer tick, well, now that crazy red meat allergy, I'm not at risk for that. So it's good knowing that what are you up against is getting that species, and it's free. What are you up against? You can do this thing called tick testing, and I want to be very clear that you can't use this for medical diagnosis. This is not something that you can WebMD yourself and then say, okay, I don't need to see a doctor about. But what this can do is give you some interesting information about what you may have been exposed to. And even, so looking at this tick was feeding for a very long time. It's an engorged tick. It was definitely feeding longer than the 24 hours. And what we know, though, is that even a tick that feeds longer than 24 hours, it's not guaranteed if the person gets disease. We just know that the risk increases. But in this particular tick report, the woman was 79. This tick was carrying the agent that causes Lyme disease and the agent that causes babesiosis. And these 2 diseases are treated differently. And so that's really good to know, is if she brought this tick report to her doctor, maybe her doctor could say, hey, you may not have either of these, you may have one or the other, but let's look at this, or, and that puts that on the doctor's radar. It's not something you could do on your own to diagnose yourself, but this may put some information on your doctor's radar. Then they could run some tests to see if you actually have these pathogens. If you get your tick tested through UMass Amherst, they run quality controls, which means that the chances of false negative, it's not really there. And so getting this kind of report back where everything is negative, especially for this 2-year-old boy, that's kind of nice to know. Again, if the boy is feeling sick, maybe there was another tick on that particular boy that you didn't notice. You can't use it for your own medical diagnosis, but it's nice knowing that this particular tick wasn't carrying anything. And the last thing I want you to do is to take a picture of the bite, so take a selfie. And it's not to post online, but it's because the rash, this bullseye rash that we know is characteristic of Lyme, right? These are both bullseye rashes right here. One of them looks like a bullseye, the other one does not. And so for a patient, right, it can give you evidence. So if you go to your doctor and you have a rash that looks like this, and your doctor says that's not the bullseye rash, well, now you could say, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll take it to another doctor for another opinion. Or if you're a doctor, now you can give a medically qualified opinion by looking at that picture. So you're not relying on just the patient to say, oh, I had this bullseye rash. It looked like a bullseye. Now the doctor can say, okay, that is indeed the bullseye rash. This is something that we can work with now. It takes some of that guesswork out of it, and that's kind of nice to do. And everyone has cameras. This is something you can do for free. So the bottom line really is, if we aren't protecting ourselves, who will? But with the right knowledge and awareness, all tick-borne diseases are preventable. So I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I appreciate your presence.